to talking about spirituality and end-of-life care and spiritual pain and assessment. And so hopefully I think we've got hopefully lots of great things to learn today. Quick intro on Tim though. Reverend Timothy Shipe joined Harborview as a chaplain, educator, and manager of spiritual care in July of 2019. He is an ordained minister within the Christian Church and the Disciples of Christ, and a board-certified chaplain with the Association of Professional Chaplains. Prior to coming to Harborview, Tim served as a chaplain and chaplain educator at Franciscan Hospice and Palliative Care in the 22-bed inpatient hospice unit. He shares a home with an amazing 14-year-old artist and ramen enthusiast named Kira and a short-haired black cat named Juju. And we are so honored to have him here sharing with us today. So I am going to hand it over to Tim to add any introductions that you would like to, and I'm happy to share a screen when you tell me to start.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Michael, for that kind introduction. And it's good to be with you all. And I'm understanding that this is happening during your lunchtime. So I'm curious, are there any cool lunch boxes out there? All right. All right. I want to share my cool lunchbox. And because we're here during lunchtime, I just wanted you to know I've got a really cool Dungeons and Dragons lunchbox. And so you know a little bit about my spirituality. I'll come back to that later. But someone probably has a cooler lunch than I do, but I'm not so sure about a cooler lunchbox.
We will be watching the chat for you a little bit. You did get a big laughing emoji from one of our participants, Brandy. So there are some smiles already.
Excellent. And I'm understanding too from another comment that just popped up, we may be in different time zones. So not everyone may be to lunch yet or have already had lunch. So I hope that this is nourishing as well, whether this is your lunchtime or not, this conversation. But again, my name is Tim Shipe and I use he, him pronouns. And I am a chaplain. And I want to say kind of at the top of this conversation that I am a firm believer that everyone has a spirituality. Not everyone has a religion. And I come to conversations about spirituality with the firm conviction that everyone has a human spirit. And it's my job to be curious about and interested in, even fascinated by, what nurtures and restores the human spirit. Because I work in a level 1 trauma center in Harborview, and we'll get into why that's important in this context and possibly in the context that you serve in as well. So for me, spirituality is about connection. And if I have an elevator speech about what chaplains do and what spiritual care is, it's basically facilitating connection. So yeah, I am going to be very interested to hear a little bit about your spiritualities in just a little bit, but want to preference this conversation with the fact that I am not, as a chaplain on the interdisciplinary care team, I'm not the only one providing spiritual care. I get to work with talented physicians and nurse practitioners and social workers, dietitians, environmental staff. We're truly an interdisciplinary care team, and whenever we provide care that connects someone, I firmly believe that we're dabbling in the area of spiritual care. What maybe separates a chaplain or a spiritual care clinician from other members of the care team is that I have different frameworks for understanding the human spirit and different ways to maybe refer to the non-physical pain that we're caring for. So I also come to this conversation with the firm belief that each of you provide excellent spiritual care in your own settings and in your own ways. And I look forward to learning a little bit about that as we go. All right. So Michael, if you would kindly share screen and go to our first slide. There is the title, and happy to share these slides and make them available at the end for people that are interested. If you would please advance the slide. Michael. I'm interested to hear, this is a prominent view, a prominent image in our healthcare system. A lot of people interact with similar images, whether they are a caregiver or care receiver. I'm interested to hear from you. How would you describe what's going on here physiologically? How would you describe what's happening in this image? And I understand we have some really cool technology, and folks can put some thoughts in the chat. Michael, would you bring up the first Slido? Gonna try to make use of this really cool technology. You can put comments in the chat, or you can scan and we'll create a word cloud of different thoughts. What's happening in that image?
Slido.com or uses this QR code in this code. And then we're just gonna go ahead and open the Slido. What do you see when you're looking at the X-ray?
Ouch. There we go. Broken.
Pain. Yeah. Concern for abuse. Broken bones, surgery. Painful, absolutely. And I saw in the chat broken tibia. This is in fact a picture of a tibia. Excellent. All right.
Another feeling going.
So yeah, I appreciate if we could come back into gallery mode. Yeah, there is a way that we look at this image as clinicians, individuals who function within a particular setting, and with our expertise, we might be able to identify what bone in the body that is and talk about a fracture as opposed to a break, as opposed to a strain. What's interesting about that image to me is that it depicts disconnection on a physiological level. There is some element of disconnection there. And that's important for me as a spiritual care clinician, or how I introduce myself to other members of the interdisciplinary care team is I refer to myself as a spiritual care intensivist. Because I am interested in not only what nourishes and heals the human spirit, replenishes the human spirit, I'm also interested in what disconnects a human spirit. And certainly trauma and injury and addiction and mental illness, among other things, disconnect an individual from another. And part of my viewpoint as a person rooted within a particular faith tradition, part of my spirituality is informed by Dungeons and Dragons and playing science fiction and fantasy games and reading books and watching movies. Part of my human spirit is nurtured by a Protestant Christian faith tradition that understands people as communal creatures, created to live in relationship with self, with others, with the divine, the transcendent, and the natural world. the nature medicine that we get to enjoy here in the Pacific Northwest. And again, trauma and injury disconnect a person, a communal creature, from lots of things. So when I look at what is spiritual pain, I look at what is disconnecting a person from another. And I really appreciated the person who put in the word cloud looking at the image, ouch. I certainly identify with that. And I would say, ouch, if that were happening to me. As you all know, as practitioners, when individuals come into the hospital, we're caring for more than just a human body, right? Not only are we caring for and tending to broken bodies, we're also tending to and caring for broken stories, broken hopes. And so as a spiritual care clinician, I look for language and rely on language that helps me identify and describe the non-physical pain that people are experiencing, because there are, I think you might agree, opioid resistant types of pain that might come in the form of shame, guilt, regret. And how many times in your practice, just in the past week or two, have you heard some feeling or detected some feeling of shame, guilt, regret, longing within the experience of the person you're caring for and listening to? So as a spiritual care clinician, I look for language to help me identify and describe the non-physical pain. And Michael, if you would again share screen and go to the next slide, I want to share 4 types of non-physical pain that I look for. And this language may be familiar to you. It may be new to you. If it's new to you, fantastic. And these 4 areas of spiritual pain come from the writing of Richard Groves, who wrote a book, The American Book of Living and Dying. This language helps me understand the things that are pushing on the human spirit and causing some distress, just like a tumor might press on a nerve. Any of these areas of spiritual pain might be impacting someone in a similar way. So the first type of non-physical pain that I look for is meaning pain. And that is the non-physical spiritual pain that arises in someone when nothing makes sense anymore. We are meaning-making creatures. And part of how we orient to the moment or to our purpose is to have a clear sense of meaning. But what happens in the experience of someone you're caring for who has been thrust out of a familiar role, for example? They are the breadwinner within their family. And then suddenly they're no longer able to work for an income. Or a family organizes around a matriarch, for example. And if that matriarch dies, the family as a whole might experience something akin to meaning pain, the loss of meaning. There is a type of pain you all have maybe cared for of a parent losing a child, right? And being asked, some of you may have been asked at some point before, when a parent loses a child, am I still a parent anymore? There's a particular type of pain that happens in kids of adults who lose the second parent. The first parent is quite a loss. And then there's something a little different, perhaps, about the second parent who dies, or the loss of a generation. Those are types of meaning pain. And then something a little different, but yet not unrelated to meaning pain, is forgiveness pain. And it is one project for a person to feel forgiven by another. Or if a person relates to a deity or the transcendent, it's another project to feel forgiven by God, however a person imagines that. But another project in entirely is forgiving self. Knowing that you have done something wrong or wronged someone or hurt someone, it's an entirely different project to seek self-forgiveness. And a different type of pain, even from meaning and forgiveness pain, is relatedness pain. And this is a huge source of pain in a lot of people, especially individuals that endured the COVID era, when a way to treat COVID was to isolate. You may have heard recent murmurings from the CDC about doing away with the sense of isolation now. I heard that on NPR yesterday. But we can recall a time where the language was you need to isolate for a period of 10 days and then 5 days. We are communal creatures, I believe, and so isolation is not a optimal way to heal or restore a human spirit. When I go to meet patients in a hospital room, I'm also interested in how a patient is relating to their caregivers. Is there any sense of relatedness pain between the care receiver and the caregiver? Because stories tell us, studies tell us, and stories that a patient who trusts their caregivers will more likely follow through on the advice of their care team. If there is relatedness pain there between a patient and their caregivers, I'm interested to see, is there a way I can help facilitate connection? There is also a sense of relatedness pain at the beginning of folks who are on the journey of dementia. When you have loved someone before that has been down that path and you begin to lose your sense of relating to others and to yourself, a person's inability to relate to themselves may be producing a type of relatedness pain that it would be really important for the care team to be mindful of. Relatedness pain is not only interpersonal, it can be intrapersonal as well. And then the sensation of hopelessness pain. And that is a big pain here in a trauma center where people's lives are turned upside down pretty quickly. A sense of being given a terminal diagnosis, hearing that language for the first time, perhaps being tethered to a bed and machines, and watching everyone around pull out their calendar, their date planner, and plan for something next week, next month, next year. If you've been told that's no longer an option for you, there may be a deep and palpable sense of hopelessness pain stirring within. If no one is around anymore to check on you, there can be a sense of not only hopelessness pain, but relatedness pain and perhaps meaning pain. Can you begin to see how these interact with one another? And just, I'd like to go back to our gallery mode for a moment. And just invite, if you would unmute, given this language and these 4 types of spiritual pain, I'd be interested to hear, have you detected any of these in a story of a person you've cared for recently?
This is Brandy. I would say professionally and personally.
Mm.
I feel like you're reading my palms.
Mm.
I love that you're giving me some language and some understanding.
Yeah, thank you, Brandy.
I have a young adult who graduated from school last summer. So she's been readjusting to adult life, and it's been a whole process. And I can see where meaning pain would come in a lot into her current experience.
Thank you, Virginia. You imagine a young person who's encountered injury, maybe even an amputation. Maybe it's a terminal diagnosis, but realizing that they may not meet some of the public rituals that people go through, a graduation, a marriage, whatever it is, not being able to get through some of those public rituals and recognitions can cause real meaning pain in some folks. How about some others?
My sister is caring for her husband who's descending into dementia. At times he forgets that he's even married to her. And so I think she's suffering relatedness pain. She's, on one hand, very impatient with his behavior, but then she's very hurt by, I guess, his lack of cooperation.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Just wanted to say, I think about this a lot with a lot of my patients who have sometimes very long histories of being disconnected from family through psychosocial issues, family trauma, and sometimes generational family trauma. And those folks that haven't talked to family in 5, 10, 30 years. And especially in times of like significant transition or periods of natural life review, what it means to like sometimes feel the acuity of that chronic loss again. But sometimes want to form reconnection, and sometimes when that reconnection happens, sometimes it's still there's a lot of strife in it. There's a lot of heartache to sort of like sit with and appreciating the years of disconnection and what it means to try to reconnect. Even though there's a crisis looming or an impending loss, sometimes that's not always a very smooth path.
When I provide staff care here at the hospital, there's a frequent theme of meaning and maybe even hopelessness pain when some meaning pain, hopelessness pain, maybe relatedness pain when a nurse works a 12-hour shift and they do that 3 or 4 times a week. It's great to have a couple days off, but then when coming back to the floor for the next shift, the whole census has changed. And so not having closure week after week, not knowing you've invested a lot of care and energy into individuals who then suddenly disappear by the time you come back again, that's impacting the quality of work life for a lot of people. And I might put that in the category of meaning pain, relatedness pain.
And there was an addition in the chat. We've got a lot of people who also work in pediatrics. Think about the potential loss of grieving a healthy child who won't be there, and even if the child lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then as caregivers, sometimes when the experience and story of the person we're caring for comes close to our own story, we can feel some of those same feelings, not to the same degree, obviously, but we might be picking up on some pain because that story of the person we're caring for hits close to home in some ways. Yeah, this language is easily accessible for me, something I can take into a room and come alongside someone pretty quickly. And the language sometimes is helpful when explaining to a patient who is really struggling to get comfortable and struggling to have a perspective on what's happening to them. Saying something like, it makes a lot of sense that you're hurting. There are at least 4 kinds of pain here. what? Helping someone be able to understand the different layers of pain that are impacting them can be empowering for some of the folks that we care for. Yeah, thank you for putting that language in the chat. And certainly, if we're going to do the work we do for any length of time, caring for self is real important. We have to be able to tend to our own human spirit. And this language may give you perspective on what is also impacting your human spirit and what needs to be cared for as you seek to care for other people. Yeah, Helena.
Thank you, Tim. I'm curious, as I was feeling these pains as you were talking about them, sort of noticing where I feel those things, where does grief fit in? And what's the overlap? It feels like, sometimes grief feels very painful, and I'm curious how, I could see it in all of these things. So I'm curious if you can help us with the language to sort of bridge some of these different kinds of experiences with grief.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that question. I see grief as kind of an overarching umbrella under which any of these could fall, because grief is a feeling response to loss. And so it could be not only the loss of something, but loss of perspective, a loss of sense of meaning, a loss of a sense of being forgiven, a loss of the sensation of being able to relate to and even physically touch another. But even if it isn't physical touch, a lot of people in this area of the world know what it's like to have loved ones deployed overseas, for example, and the occasional phone call or tweet or poke or whatever the terms are now just is not the same as actually physically being able to touch a loved one. Folks get deployed sometimes to parts of the world we don't know where they are. And so grief in the form of loss of a sense of control or knowledge about something that you care for deeply. Grief is sort of overarching. And sometimes grief, the term, can be talked about in a way where folks kind of assume that they know where everyone is referring to the same thing. So the meaning, forgiveness, relatedness, hopelessness, pain helps me pare down what is it that's being lost, what is being missed. Because just like the word pain gets thrown around in the clinical setting as if everyone understands what pain is. But we're often caring for more than just physical pain. So having language to point to specifically what is being lost is helpful. Yeah, great question. I want to go to the next slide if we could, Michael. And when detecting pain, what to do about that? When detecting several different types of pain, what to do about that? This is language that helps me understand what recharges the human spirit. And again, I said at the beginning, I'm a person who is rather convinced that not all of us have a religion, but everyone has a human spirit. And that human spirit is nourished and recharged by a variety of things. And this chart helps me imagine the different ways that people recharge and renew and connect. So there's something that we might refer to as personal spirituality. And again, we'll share the slides. Don't worry about writing all of this down. But a personal spirituality has to do with self-partnering. And that can come in the form of self-regard, physical care, emotional self-care, work. It may be surprising for some people to see the word work up there, but there are people who derive great meaning from the work that they do, the work that they produce. Sense of sexuality, human development and aging, materiality. I put that on there. I am a pen snob. I love writing handwritten letters. I love writing letters to my daughters. And I've done that since before they were born. And I can't use just a big pen. It has to be a fountain, a dip pen. It has to be good paper. There's something that helps me renew and connect by a handwritten letter. And so we have projects, we have things, hobbies that we do. It may be yarn for you. It may be paint, acrylics, or watercolors. It may be baking, whatever it is, materiality. Nesting, the notion of nesting, athletics, hobbies, those are all things that I think fit under a category of personal spirituality. But then there's the people partnering we do. And we might think of things that would fall under interpersonal spirituality, the romantic love, that when it's working, it's the greatest thing in the world. When it's not, it's one of the worst types of pain that a person can experience, right? A sense of parenting, childing, friending, learning, our connection to elders, siblings. And again, these can also be a source of spiritual pain as well. But for some people, their siblings are in fact their greatest tether to this planet and this existence. Grandparenting, help giving, and help getting. Caregivers are great at giving help and find meaning for that, not so great at getting help, but that can nurture our human spirit as caregivers. And then critters. How many of you have critters? Yeah, a lot of people do. Our pets are a way that we partner and recharge and renew. And then there's something we might call metapersonal spirituality. Our sense of nature and the natural world, the losses that we endure and process and heal from, our sense of mortality. We might have a sense of deity, if that falls within our particular faith system, and then religion. Lots of different religious expressions. Creativity and the arts. I love painting myself. Watercolors. I'm scared of oils, but I'm trying to become less scared of oil painting. A sense of cosmic harmony. And then communopersonal spirituality. Communal partnering. Our sense of our family of origin, our ethnic heritage, the neighborhoods that shape us. Gender communities, peer communities, faith communities, nation, human community. Just for a moment, I want to go back, take you back in your imagination to the image of the X-ray. This is my X-ray that I hold up. This is where I look for the fractures. This is where I look for the sprains or the breaks. Because again, for me, human beings are communal creatures meant to live in relationship and enjoy connection. If I'm noticing and caring for someone and I notice that there are breaks or there are strains here, this is where I know where I might focus and help facilitate connection. The other thing I want to point out about this chart is it helps me put in perspective, religion is but one dot here. I hear a lot in the clinical setting, oh, this person doesn't need a chaplain, they're not religious. That would miss out on so much of my spirituality if the only thing you knew about me was that I'm Christian. I showed you my lunchbox. My human spirit is nurtured by fantasy, by science fiction. And if you didn't know that, if that wasn't captured in the medical chart somewhere, you would miss a significant part of how I renew myself. I'm interested, could we go to the next slide? There's another Slido I would like to try and ask for your feedback. If you would be willing to share elements of your spirituality as you understand it. If we can create another word cloud, how do you renew and recharge your own human spirit? in a variety of ways. Can we create a word cloud around that? Travel. Absolutely. Camping, music. And I'm lost in nature. Excellent. Something I learned from Helene early on, being directionally impaired. I also would describe myself as directionally impaired, and so the word lost. I'm great at getting lost, and sometimes that doesn't cause me to feel connection, but I love someone gets lost in nature. Dance, travel someplace tropical. Another dancing, being present. Growing plants, awesome. I consider myself a master composter. I can turn any thriving plant into thriving compost. So I appreciate those that are really good at growing things. Seeing the world through my 8-year-old, awesome. That is a different perspective. That is cool. Playing with kids, singing, gardening, humming, reading, spending time with my family. Being someone unfamiliar and needing to discover and feel uncomfortable and surprised. Ah.
I'm on a webinar, but nice to see you.
Excellent. Love the ideas here. The person that put being someone unfamiliar and needing to discover and feel uncomfortable and surprised, I would love to hear just a little bit more about that. If you're willing to unmute and share, don't want to put you on the spot. But
That was me. And I added, it was somewhere.
being somewhere.
I feel like it's a really easy thing to say travel, like, but what I really actually like about travel is being somewhere that I don't know the space and I don't know the people, and sometimes I don't know the language and like customs. Like it forces me to sort of question a lot of like myself and my comforts, and to be in a space of learning and exploration and discomfort, and like it feels very life-giving, and it feels like it forces me to create new connections and create like synapses and new relationships. So it is sometimes when I feel like my most true self, because I have to sort of break down all the familiar things around me in my life to not have those things to rely upon, or figure out what of those things I do rely on as my like core sense of self.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate that. Meditation, mindfulness, pushing my physical limits. The great ideas. Thank you for sharing. Can we go back to the gallery screen? And one of the things that I take into my practice, and again, if this is useful to you, are there any Latin scholars in here? Maybe a couple people that have studied Latin at somewhere along the way, but the original concept of assessment, we hear the word assessment all the time in healthcare, and everyone's doing one. Every practitioner, including chaplains, are doing an assessment. The cool thing about assessment is it comes from the two Latin words ad sitio. And so translated quite literally, assessment comes from the notion that how do you get to know what is important to a person, what a person needs? Ad sitio means sit next to. It's a very simple concept that how do you get to know the people that we're caring for you sit next to? them. And it's not necessarily a diagnostic listening that will give us an impression of how a person nurtures their human spirit. But if you have availability and the bandwidth to be curious and invite stories, we also know through interpersonal neurobiology that storytelling actually connects places, synapses within the brain that get disconnected by trauma and injury. Storytelling helps integrate the brain and brings together the places where the centers for smelling and remembering and tasting, they come together in storytelling. And that's a pretty cool thing if we have the bandwidth to invite a story. And I told Michael this, when I want to find the storytellers and the story catchers in healthcare, I go to the palliative care notes. That's where I look for, how am I going to get to know this patient? Look for the palliative care notes in the electronic medical record. There you'll hear stories. Yeah, I invite your questions, your curiosities, your thoughts as we've talked. What's occurring to you? What's expanding your imagination as a clinician, or things that you're noticing that you might take back to your practice?
Nine by the moment thing. Because what you just did is you framed the three questions that these folks are so used to asking us over and over and over. So maybe we just give everyone like a moment to think before we come up. Like, what are the things that you're sitting with? Like, what's maybe surprising you? Like resonating? What are you noodling on? And is there something you feel like you might be wanting to take into your practice or curious about how to take into your practice? Maybe we'll just like give a minute for people to ponder that and see what ideas people have. Almost like we set you up.
This is Jody. I found it really interesting that assessment tool, if you like, that you used with all those different pieces in there. I think that's really helpful way to help people understand spirituality. So often it's, as you said, no, I don't need a chaplain, or no, they're not religious, they don't need a chaplain. But that tool was something that I'll continue to be looking at. Thank you.
There's a question, Tim, in the chat. A couple come in. How do we make a case for your role in an agnostic business model?
Yeah, it's a
This-
great question. Go ahead, Michael.
I think it said there was the caveat, make a case of the C-suite, especially.
Yeah, so again, the notion that agnostic, it's not a requirement for people to be religious. We look at the work-life survey results. We do those results every year, take those surveys to look at what helps people feel the greatest job satisfaction. It's not having more chapels. It's not having more rituals necessarily. It's about the people who are most satisfied are the people who are feeling most disconnected. Disconnected from the promise of the electronic medical record was, we don't have to fight over the chart anymore. I remember the days when we had to find the one chart so we could scratch our notes next to whoever scratched their notes previously. And what has happened is people spend more time in healthcare with papers and forms than they do patients. And that's not satisfying anyone. It's caused a great sense of disconnection from the people we're caring for. None of us, I think, got into the work we're doing to spend more time with papers. So finding a way to make an argument that people who feel more connected to their patients and the work and the institution that they serve, finding ways to make an argument that it's disconnection that is causing a loss of a sense of job satisfaction. We can make a case that we need folks who are paying attention to how connected people feel to the people they're serving and the institution that they serve. Yeah, what do you say after you say, "I see you're hurting"? That's a great question, and there are a variety of ways that I can get into a room quickly. As here at Harborview, I don't always have the luxury of time because someone may be whisked off pretty soon to a procedure. I myself don't rely on a lot of questions to come alongside the patient or the care receiver quickly. The phrase I use, and this gets me quickly alongside the person I'm serving, I couldn't help but notice. Questions require a person who's heavily medicated and maybe doesn't have the energy to satisfy my curiosity. I couldn't help but notice that deep sigh, the energy with which you put down the phone. That's hard to wiggle away from when asking someone, "How are you doing today?" How many times have you been asked and the person who's asking is way down the hallway? They're not really interested in. But using a phrase like "I couldn't help but notice" gives the impression that I see someone. And that primal spiritual need of any communal creature is to be seen, heard, and understood. So saying something like "I couldn't help but notice" and let yourself know what you know about the people you're caring for will get you next to them a lot quicker than relying on questions initially. It's not to say all questions are bad. I would never have you reform your practice in that sense. Yeah. Other thoughts that people have had a chance to think what you might bring to your practice?
I'll assume, Tim, or maybe there's one other comment in the chat now too.
Yeah, I have encountered this a couple times in hospice, where a family wants to take a patient or family member to a self-declared healer, and it can be easy to get distracted by who that healer is, what their credentials are. Someone has placed their hope in someone else. What I would be interested in is the hurt underneath that is driving that wanting to connect with a healer. I can't talk someone out of their perspective, but what I can care for is the sense of urgency. It goes back to grief. What is this person having to say goodbye to? Everyone in healthcare has to say goodbye to something. We sometimes get distracted by the big D's. There are little deaths that happen all the time. And so the more interested in and curious about the small D's that I can be as a clinician will help me care for what's driving that family to want to seek out someone who can maybe change the outcome. But noticing, describing, reflecting back, I get it's a desperate time. That's what's underneath. And if I try to spend time talking the person out of whatever, we might we might miss each other, an opportunity to care for that meaning pain, hopelessness pain that's underneath. Yeah, thank you for asking.
I really appreciate that, because I do feel like sometimes when people are invoking miracle language, what they're really asking for is grief support. And I really think that, yeah, I really appreciate those 4 ways of naming that. That makes it accessible to all, including the person experiencing it. So I think if we can be holding that in terms of what does the emotion stand for, and ask or observe, to your point, this sounds like this must be really hard to let go.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that can transform the experience of the caregiver and care receiver from the sense of, oh my gosh, they want someone else. They're not wanting me, they're wanting someone else. We can transform that to, of course, they're wanting to pursue every avenue. This is their loved one. This is their kid. This is their son. This is their parent. Of course, they want, and that frees me up then to have a different type of relationship, for our relationship to hold a little more complexity. There's a question. I have a 14-year-old with osteosarcoma mets. She said with emotion, yeah, I have so much I want to do. Is this the time for an exploring question? Or I would be interested in what this person wants to do, and invite a story or stories. Maybe even with a 14-year-old, some art. Sometimes we can speak it, sometimes we can draw it. Yeah, what are those dreams that a person's having to let go of?
I don't know if you've encountered this. I'm sorry I'm talking so much, but it's just really striking me. I don't even know what movie I was watching, but it might have been New Amsterdam or something, where the spiritual healer, this person really wanted to get to their daughter's funeral, and that wasn't going to happen. So instead, she led him through an imaginary to be at the wedding. Sorry, it was not a funeral, it was a wedding. So maybe that's even like for some of those things, what is it that she wants to do? And can you facilitate her imagining what that experience, let her have the experience without being in the experience, is I think what the message was.
Yeah, you all no doubt have been cared for by practitioners. You may not have used this language to describe it, but you've been cared for by people who lack imagination. And that leaves an impression, right? Imagination is so important, because if you can't imagine alternatives, healing can't happen, learning can't happen, growth can't happen. And trauma and injury isolates and narrows creativity and imagination. So helping someone tell a story can help broaden imagination. And again, it gives us a fuller picture with someone of what they're having to say goodbye to. And what someone is having to say goodbye to may surprise us as caregivers, because what I sometimes think is the thing a person's most concerned about is not in fact what they're concerned about. Being taught by our patients is a good thing.
One of the things I reflect on, we talk a lot in this program about exploring personhood and values as the foundation for making recommendations for care, especially when there are big, important decisions looming. And so much of what you're talking about is helping us explore some of those same stories with this different lens of understanding the different types of pain, especially as we talk about the total pain model, knowing that people experience sometimes physical pain as a manifestation of all this other existential suffering. But there's an interrelatedness to this spiritual, psychological, emotional, physical pain. And like listening deeply in these different ways by sitting with, sitting next to, and having these other concepts, like what are the things that we wrap into our recommendations? What are the ways we listen to these stories to attend to some of the points of like disconnection people feel, what are things we incorporate, and bring in other team members to help us understand how we create some different connection. Think more broadly about coaching here. So it's such a nice tie-in, I think, to a lot of the concepts that we've spent a lot of time talking together as a community with. I recognize we're just about at time. Tim, I wonder, just to note, you'll get slides, there'll be a recording of this if you want to go back for anything. Tim, I wonder if you have any closing thoughts before we wrap for the day.
I want to express appreciation for you showing up here in this space. And I want to express appreciation for the care that you all provide. It makes a difference. You may not be able to fix anything. And that's not what we do. Helping people feel less isolated can promote a different type of healing and very meaningful healing. So thank you for the work you all do.
Thanks to everyone for taking some of your time today to be with us. We look forward to seeing you again soon. There'll be another webinar coming up. You'll get details, but check us out on campus.